One moment, the Emirates Airbus A380 was flying through the night sky, and then the next, it was crashing down towards the Moscow suburbs, just seconds away from becoming a fiery wreck. Warnings blared, confusion filled the cockpit, and the ground rushed closer. No one on board knew they were on the brink of disaster, so how did it all go so terribly wrong? Waking up for another flight wasn't exactly exciting for this Emirates Airbus A380. Imagine being a 300-ton flying giant, admired by millions, yet constantly pushed to the limit. Sure, people loved to watch it take off, marveled at its size, and enjoyed the luxury inside. But behind all that glamour, it was exhausting work. The last flight had only been a couple of weeks ago, barely enough time to rest. For a plane of this scale, that's like asking a marathon runner to sprint again before their legs have fully recovered. But who cares about an airplane's feelings, right? Airlines have schedules to keep, passengers to transport, and money to make. The A380 wasn't just a machine. It was a business asset, and businesses don't take breaks. If planes could talk, the A380 would have plenty to complain about. 2 flights a month? That's a lot for someone as valuable as me. And valuable it was, each flight cost an enormous amount to operate, from maintenance to fuel to the salaries of the highly trained crew that managed it. Yet, despite its cost and complexity, it was still expected to work like clockwork, always ready to soar. The engines roared to life, a deep, powerful hum that sent vibrations through the entire aircraft. This was the moment the Emirates A380 lived for. It had done this 1,000 times before, but every takeoff still felt special, like a king stepping onto his throne. Everything was set for a smooth journey from Dubai to Moscow. The weather was perfect, the sky clear, and the runway stretched out ahead, ready to send this flying giant into the air once again. Inside the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, the pilots ran through their checklists, speaking in calm, precise voices. Takeoff procedures were second nature to them, flaps set, throttle pushed forward, and the aircraft responded like the well-oiled machine it was. Despite its massive size, the A380 moved gracefully, gathering speed down the runway. Passengers, some excited and others too focused on their in-flight entertainment screens, felt the unmistakable surge as the wheels lifted off the ground. In the sky, everything felt effortless. The autopilot took over, guiding the aircraft along its designated route. From this height, the world below looked peaceful, endless deserts fading into cities, then into the vast landscapes of Europe. Inside, flight attendants moved smoothly through the cabin, offering meals and drinks, while passengers settled in for the long haul. Some watched movies, others dozed off, trusting the massive machine to carry them safely to their destination. The journey had been smooth so far. No turbulence, no delays, just a routine flight from Dubai to Moscow. As the city came into view, the pilots in the cockpit prepared for landing. It was dark, but the weather was clear. The Emirates A380, in all its massive glory, was on schedule and ready to touch down. Everything was going according to plan until it wasn't.
Try to think about the girl you love and all the time, so happy to get.
Somewhere in the final approach, a critical mistake slipped in. The co-pilot, focused on his instruments, believed the plane was flying too high. In reality, it was the opposite. The aircraft was already too low. But in the dimly lit cockpit, surrounded by flashing screens and countless readings, perception can be tricky. The human brain relies on what it sees, and the co-pilot was convinced they needed to descend faster. Relax, we'll just correct it, the crew probably thought. After all, adjustments like these happen all the time. A slight tweak, a bit more descent, and they'd be back on the right path. But what seemed like a small fix quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. The A380, a giant in the sky, began dropping faster than it should have.
400. 400.
The massive Airbus A380 was falling too fast, and no one inside had any idea. The passengers were relaxed, some half asleep, others lost in their movies, completely unaware that they were just seconds away from disaster. Outside, the city lights of Moscow stretched below, and somewhere in the distance, Domodedovo Airport waited for their arrival. But at that moment, they weren't headed toward the runway, they were plummeting straight toward the suburbs. At just 120 meters above the ground, the aircraft was barely skimming over the rooftops of Gorky Leninsky, a quiet residential area. To put that into perspective, this 300-ton flying machine was only 1.5 times its wingspan away from smashing into houses. And yet, inside the cockpit, the pilots still didn't realize the full danger of what was happening. They believed their instruments were wrong, and that the plane was higher than it was. Trusting that assumption, they continued their rapid descent. On the ground, a Russian air traffic controller watched in horror as the aircraft dropped too fast. He tried to warn them, his voice cutting through the radio. But his English wasn't strong enough to get the urgency across. He repeated his instructions multiple times, hoping the pilots would understand. But up in the cockpit, they were slow to react. They weren't ignoring the warnings. They just didn't believe them.
Terrain, terrain. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
Terrain, set max thrust.
Pull up.
The silence in the cockpit was shattered by a sharp, robotic voice screaming through the speakers, "Terrain! Terrain! Pull up! Pull up!" The warning wasn't just a suggestion. It was an urgent, last-minute call to save hundreds of lives. At that moment, the reality of the situation finally hit the captain. The instruments weren't lying. The plane wasn't too high, it was dangerously low, and they were running out of time. Adrenaline surged through him as he took over the controls. His hands gripped the yoke, and with all his strength, he yanked it back, forcing the massive aircraft to climb. But the A380 wasn't a small jet. It was a 300-ton behemoth, and it didn't just shoot up instantly. For a terrifying few seconds, it continued to sink, dropping another 109 feet. That might not sound like much, but when you're already skimming just above the rooftops, it's the difference between survival and catastrophe. The passengers, still unaware of how close they were to disaster, might have felt a sudden shift. Maybe their ears popped, or their stomachs dropped for a moment. But in the cockpit, it was chaos. Lights flashed, alarms blared, and the captain fought against the pull of gravity, forcing the plane away from the ground. Every second counted. The near crash should have been the end of the drama, but the trouble wasn't over yet. Even after narrowly avoiding disaster, the pilots still had one crucial task ahead, actually landing the plane. And that turned out to be harder than expected. After regaining control, the crew tried to get the aircraft back on track for a safe descent into Domodedovo Airport. The plan was simple: line up with the runway, reduce speed, and bring the A380 down smoothly. But something was still off. Their landing setup wasn't right, and the instruments weren't cooperating. The approach wasn't stable, and at the last moment, the crew had to abort. For the second time, they went in for another attempt. By this point, the stress in the cockpit must have been overwhelming. The plane was still in the air, circling back for another landing, while the passengers remained blissfully unaware of what was happening. To them, it probably just felt like a slightly longer descent. Meanwhile, The pilots were battling exhaustion, pressure, and the weight of their near disaster. The second attempt didn't work either. Again, something wasn't right. And again, they had to pull up and reset. A plane this size couldn't just turn on a dime. It needed space, time, and precise coordination. But after 2 failed approaches, the stakes were getting higher. They needed to get this right. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. Yeah.